my name is Peter. On the my professional name is Master Peter, but most of you won't have encountered me on a professional basis. I'm sure you would remember if you had. And I am a professional dominant. So effectively, that means that I am I'm paid to introduce people to kink and BDSM broadly. And my caveat to that is actually people of all of the 5 erotic blueprints we've just talked about end up coming to see me and interacting with this kind of thing, because actually the broadest range of kink and BDSM covers really all of these kind of areas in one shape or form. So last 10 years, I've spent most of my time working with individuals and couples on both a kind of a session and a coaching basis. I also run spaces at clubs and events, and I also do a lot of education. So I'm very much an evangelist about this kind of thing. And one of the very frequent questions I get asked is, how do I go in my relationship, whether it be an existing relationship or a new relationship, from however we operate on a day-to-day basis into some kind of role play, some kind of interesting scenario. And we're all locked down at the moment, so I feel that more than ever people are looking at new and interesting ways to connect. And so this is really one of the things that I get asked, you know, so frequently. So I'm going to give you, in a very short period of time, something that I often spend a kind of a good hour, 90 minutes coaching people on. And we're going to talk about this. And the first thing I just want to say is that role play is not for everyone, and nobody should feel like they are less fun or less interesting or less sexy or less kinky or whatever it might be if role play is not for you and it just doesn't kind of gel. But hopefully what I will do is give you some kind of tips and tricks which will make it less daunting. And I think a lot of people have a certain amount of anxiety about this kind of thing because it can feel naturally inauthentic. It can feel naturally a little bit awkward. So when we think about role playing, the first thing for me is understanding how people actually experience things. And the erotic blueprints does a great job of explaining how people experience things in an erotic context, but a role play isn't necessarily erotic. So we have to take a step back and understand how people experience things more generally. And there's a strong correlation to how people learn, actually. So when you learn, if you're a trainer, you have to consider your audience in the sense of, are they more visual? So they really kind of like to watch and understand through looking at things. Are they more auditory? It's very much the words you use and the language you use, and they'll listen and absorb information that way. Or are they more kinesthetic? By which I mean it's more about the movements. It's more they need to actually go and do things to really embody them and learn them. And it's the same for a role play. You have some people who are much more visual in terms of how they experience things like this. And for those people, it's very much around what are you wearing? What accessories have you got? What is the kind of the setting that you're using? So all of the things that they're going to pick up with their eyes. And you don't have to worry about trying to win the Oscar for best costume or anything. It's not about it being 100% perfect, because what we do as humans very well is we latch onto one thing and then we kind of build suspended disbelief around it. So if I was going to be a kind of a militaristic army type person, for example, then wearing this kind of beret is probably enough for people to kind of latch onto that. And then if I kind of, you know, support that with the rest of the scene, then that's probably going to be fine. So you've got the visual people, and then you've got the people who are more auditory. And by the way, you're not one or the other. You're just going to be slightly more in one or the other, but it's really a Venn diagram to a certain extent. So the people who are more auditory, it's very much about the language you use. So it's about words and terminology and lingo and jargon and having a bit of a script. So people who are more auditory, you really need to think about what you're going to say when you're doing a role play with them. Maybe you're going to script out a few little lines, a couple of killer phrases, which just make the whole kind of thing work. And it's not just about the words, it's also about the tone you use. So for example, if I go back to the army kind of thing, if I was going to be an army officer, then I'm going to talk in much more clipped, direct type phrases, and it's all going to be very much kind of action oriented, and I'm going to be very succinct. Whereas if I am, for example, going to be, let's say, a Catholic priest, because I was hired to be that recently, then I'm going to be kind of like softer and talk in slightly more flowing kind of words, and I might use some very kind of long words, because likely I've gone through kind of like 6 to 10 years of education and all of this kind of stuff. So it's about tone as well. And then finally, you've got the people who are more kinesthetic. So it doesn't, you know, great, you've got a great costume, you've learnt a few lines or something like that, but it's really going to kick in for these people when suddenly they're in a situation and something's happening to them. So that's the more kind of physical elements of whatever your role play might exist, whether it's, you know, whatever that might be. So it's all about kind of positioning, it's about movement, it's about sensations and materials and that kind of thing. So my first tip is, you know, if you're planning this kind of thing with somebody, the first cheat code, if you like, is just to ask them about previous experiences doing this kind of stuff. Like, hey, you know, have you ever done like something like this before? How was it? What worked for you? What did you enjoy? What really made it special? And you can get some really important clues from that. But also, particularly if they have no idea about that, they've never tried something like that before, you can also talk to them in nice open terms around what you might do. So in the world of kink, we do a lot of time negotiating things, negotiating our scenes and negotiating people's boundaries and consent and that kind of thing, because we don't want anyone to have a bad experience, and we need to get enthusiastic consent behind everything. So if you're going to have a role play, you know, have a discussion about it beforehand and say, hey, look, you know, why don't we do this? It might be really fun. How do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? What does that like sound to you? You know, and you can start basically spotting people's reactions. You know, if you get really excited when you talk about like what you might be wearing, then maybe they're more a visual person. If they get really excited when you start talking about what you might actually do in physical terms, then maybe they're more kinesthetic. And if they get really excited when you start talking about words and things like that, then maybe they're more kind of auditory. So build a little bit of a picture of that. And then the next step is really to do a bit of planning. And you know, this can sound very daunting to people. So what I want to say is, it's not like a screenplay. You don't have to script every single thing. It's not. There's no stage directions. You don't have to. You don't have to do it line by line. But have a think about a story, and a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So from a beginning perspective, how are you going to get into this? Now, one of the really useful tips from my perspective is that you create a bit of an air gap between your normal life and this scenario, this scene, this role play that you're going to do. And this could actually happen several days ago. Let's say you're going to do something Friday night, maybe Wednesday morning, you're going to send your partner an email kind of going, right, you know, and just starting getting into the kind of the mood of things, because anticipation, you know, it's not just for the energetic erotic blueprint, by the way, but generally anticipation can be a really kind of juicy thing to play with and get people excited about something that they know is going to happen. So you can build up that anticipation, and then on the day, maybe there's some instructions about what to do at what time. And then, you know, a worst case scenario, make sure you're not like sat next to each other and then you're like, hey, shall we start this role play now? And everyone's like, yeah, let's do that. Okay, like in 3, 2, 1, because that's going to be really awkward, right? You need to be, you need to have some space, be in different rooms. Maybe you're going to say something like, right, I'm going to go for a shower. When I come back, I expect to find you here. you know, in this position, or wearing this thing, or whatever it might be. And when I walk in, you know, that's when we start. And that gives you the ability to take a nice breath and kind of like, you're ready for it, they're ready for it. They know, you know, there's this concrete kind of start time for whatever's happening. Or it could be that you meet in public at a restaurant or something, you know, and you start at that moment in time when you meet, or you find each other in a bar, or on a park bench, or, you know, whatever it might be. So have that starting point. And then the kind of a progression in the middle bit is very much whatever story you want to tell, but understand why you're doing it. Are you doing it because this is going to be a really sexy thing and it's going to end in some form of sex type activity? Is it actually just for the joy of role play and it's going to be something that you enjoy without necessarily getting into that dimension? Is it a kinky thing where you're going to use the role play as a vehicle to get into something kinky? You know, just understand what the purpose of that journey is, and then you can kind of decide, you know, what is the journey? And my advice is, like any good story, is you have some peaks and troughs and some kind of moments of excitement, and then kind of smooth it out, and then take it up a little bit, and then smooth it out, and make it into a kind of a fun roller coaster. And then that end bit is also important, because you need to go back to your everyday lives at some point. So you need to be able to de-escalate it, you know, however it finishes, whether it just finishes in a kind of like a real cathartic release because it's been a really intense kind of emotional roller coaster, or it ends in an orgasm, or it ends in a kind of like some kind of stylized goodbye as part of a scene. Just understand what that looks like. So the best way for me to articulate this is give you an example of a role play that I do quite frequently. It's a very popular one. I'm going to spend about 5 minutes going through that, and then we're going to have kind of a few minutes at the end for some questions. And the role play I'm going to use is a police arrest. And this works very well for me because I actually spent a few years solving kidnaps in the police force as a special sergeant. So I have a bit of an advantage here in that I know the lingo. So for the visual people, you don't need a lot, but one important thing is a police hat. I've got my police hat here. I'm going to work the old police hat on. There we go. Already starting to look more like a police officer. I've got my little vest here. And importantly, I have some handcuffs. And already in just a few seconds, I have become so much more like a police officer. And I don't have a full uniform on. I don't need a full uniform. I've got enough that somebody is like, okay, wow, all right, there's a police officer. So the first thing I'm going to do then is I'm going to surprise them. I need to find them somewhere where they're not expecting me, or I need to make my entrance so quick that their first reaction is, oh my God, there's a police officer. And very quickly, I'm going to go into some kind of stop and account, which is where I say, hello, can you account for your presence in this area? Tell me what you're doing here. And we'll get into a conversation, and very quickly, I will start to find some kind of reason to search them. And my favorite one is, look, I can see that your eyes are quite dilated. Have you potentially taken anything you shouldn't have today? And they'll go, no, 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 no. And then I'll say, okay, well, you're detained for a search under Section 23 of the Misuse of Drugs Act, because I believe you've got some kind of materials on you. And then we'll go into a pat down thing, which is nice kind of physical kinesthetics thing that they'll really enjoy. And I'll be kind of, you know, a bit like if you go to the airport and you've forgotten a metal thing somewhere on your body. I'm going to go top to toe, front and back. And then we'll kind of get underneath the clothing a little bit, probably more than a normal police officer would be, because that just adds a bit of juicy kind of naughtiness to it. And then I would have pocketed a little packet of salt or something, and I will whip it out of like their underwear or something like that. I'll say, can you explain to me what this is? And at this point, they will be completely flabbergasted because they have never seen this before. They had no idea this was going to happen. And they'll be on the back foot. What will happen is I'll arrest them for possession of that substance, which I believe to be Class A drug. And then I'll go and have a tape recorded interview with them. And I'll just interrogate them. And eventually I'll let them go, and I'll give them a copy of the tape as a memento. And this whole thing actually involves zero sexual content, and actually zero kind of BDSM content, really. It's just a scene that people really enjoy because it gives them access to something that probably won't happen to them. Or if it does, you know, it will feel kind of slightly more personal to them, slightly more kind of like, slightly more inappropriate, and they will enjoy it. They'll enjoy that kind of natural tension. So the end of a scene is that they're bailed to return. You know, I could take it in a different way. I could say, right, we've got a summary justice scheme now. Instead of wasting the court's time, I can give you a punishment on the spot. Do you consent to that? And then it would turn straight into a kind of some kind of BDSM scene, and they'd get a good flogging or something, courtesy of old Bill. So, you know, there's different ways you can play it, but that's an example of a piece of role play. So just to summarize, what we've talked about is understanding how people experience things, whether they're auditory, they're more visual, they're more kinesthetic. We've talked about having an idea of a kind of a beginning, middle, and an end to a scene. At the beginning, it's all about creating that air gap so that you can kind of ease into the scene without any awkwardness, and it feels kind of authentic. The middle part is where you create your story with a goal in mind, whatever that might be. And the end bit is where you de-escalate and you're allowed to return back to your everyday kind of relationship with that person, whatever it might be. And I've given you a bit of a kind of an example with this. I'm going to take it off because it feels silly now. I'll put this back on. There we go. So we have 4 minutes left of my time allotment. I feel like I've squeezed a lot into a very short period of time. So if you're interested in a kind of a longer discussion around roleplay, or indeed any of the other things I teach, then you can find me at masterpeter.co.uk, and I'll drop me a line, submit at masterpeter.co.uk, and I'll be very happy to answer your questions in a more leisurely way. But does anyone have any questions right now?
Anyone?
Silence. Hopefully, because your minds are racing about what you're going to do next.
So, Peter, I've got just as an example of it. I don't know if it's necessarily a question, but it's kind of obviously, you know, and someone wrote in the chat earlier on with a, you know, no sex, please, we're British, and quite often it's like when you approach, and this is so bringing on internal connection with you, obviously with yourself, and quite often when it comes to I think I want to do this, but I feel like an energetic reaction inside my body, and whether you link that to shame or whatever it might be behind it. And quite often people don't act on it. Like, and so I just wonder, is there anything, is there any like baby steps you can do to kind of, yeah, I suppose it depends what you're into, I guess, but is there like in a safe place, how would you, what would be a top tip for you to say, to open that conversation with your partner?
Such a great question. So I'm a big fan of kind of structured exploration, and this is all about baby steps. And with a partner, sometimes it's around having really good conversations, first of all, about what you like, and making that a very safe space to do. You know, so I think first of all, there needs to be an understanding that no two humans are completely alike in everything they like and they don't like. And if there is differences in what you like and your partner likes, that's fine. One of the very good tools that I found is actually doing a variation of what's often called a sex menu, which is, and you can find these online. I think sexmenus.wordpress.com is one site. It's effectively an inventory of every kind of sexy, kinky thing that you can think of, next to a whole bunch of columns. And the columns are things like, I like to do this with an existing partner, with a new partner, I fantasize about this, I'm curious about this, I don't like this, all of these kind of things. And then, you know, you can fill it out. And if you're going to fill it out by yourself, not with your partner, because you'll be looking over their shoulder and I'll go, I really like this thing, and you'll be like, I don't like this thing, but I'm going to put myself as curious or something. You're going to end up with some miscalibrated stuff. So do it yourself, have your partner do it, and then just share them and have a chat about it. And sometimes you'll find these two things that you're both curious about and you never had the courage to talk about, and then you can go, oh my God, shall we try this? Yeah. And it will just open the doors to new experiences in a really, really effective way.
Amazing. Well, yeah, thank you. Yeah, like that, what that does is, yeah, it's a way of having like obviously communication and then connection, and then you find out something about your partner you didn't know, and obviously when you find that out, you build a trust bond and you have some sort of connection there, and it's a wonderful way of getting into that. So thank you very much for your time, my friend. That was absolutely, yeah, it's really, really educational. And
My pleasure.
Round of applause to everybody.
Vulnerability is a muscle. The more you use it, the more you practice it, the easier it becomes.